Hi, good evening. Welcome to the 7th edition of Multipolis Mumbai. Our conversation this evening is on literature and our city, brought to you by Avid Learning in association with Studio X and Literature Live. I would like to start this evening's program with a short video introducing you to Avid. Sorry. Avid, as you briefly saw, is an SR initiative fostering creative learning across literature, culture, heritage, and arts, including visual, performing, and applied arts, through workshops and discussion forums. Avid aspires to engage with all those who aspire to with a living with the arts. Avid is also proud to be associated with Literature Live, to be held at NCPA from the 31st of October to 4th November, where Avid will present 10 workshops on topics like creative learning, food writing, poetry writing, playwriting, and writing for children. I would also like to take a moment to thank you all for coming and express gratitude to our partners. Multipolis Mumbai is on Innovation and Our City on 7th of November, right here at Studio X. The speakers for the evening are Abhay Sardesai, Altaf Charwala, moderated by Naresh Fernandez. Finally, before I hand over, let's commence this thought-provoking session with literature and our city.
Good evening and welcome to yet another edition of Multipolis Mumbai. This week we're going to talk about Bombay books, and it's an especially relevant theme because the next few weeks are going to bring a platoon of big-name writers to the city. V.S. Naipaul will be here at the end of October for the Literature Live Festival, with which Avid is associated. And after that, Catherine Booth, Suketu Mehta, and Kiran Desai, I think, will be among the speakers at the Times Literary Carnival, which will be held from December 7th to December 9th. Thanks. The past few years have witnessed a real explosion of book buying across India as literacy levels rise, chain stores proliferate, and Flipkart dreams up new marketing and distribution strategies. Exact figures are difficult to come by, but people in the trade estimate that book sales are growing at about 45% a year in terms of volume. The number of books published in English is going up by about 30% a year. This means, of course, that there's been an explosion of writing too. As anybody who's visited a bookshop recently knows, Bombay has been fortunate to be the muse for several writers over the last few years. In 2007, Time Out put together this map. It's a sort of stylized shape of Bombay, marking the neighborhoods in the city that had been featured in Bombay books. There weren't really so many. Among those that stood out were Eunice D'Souza's Danger Log, which is set in Vakola. There was Gangadhar Gadgil's Praram, which unfolds in 19th century Girgaon, and Cyrus Mystery's Radiance of Ashes, which takes place in Kharegat colony near Kemp's Corner. As I was preparing for this event, I went to my bookshelf to try to update the map. Can you move on to the next slide, please? It was a pretty random exercise based on the books in my collection, but I was still able to find about a dozen spots to add. Mahim made the list because of Jerry Pinto's poignant M and the Big Whom. Vakola added a square because of Arvind Adiga's Last Man in Tower. Mira Road is the backdrop for Sonia Ferrero's Beautiful Thing. And Meenal Baghel's death in Mumbai unfolds largely in the showbiz world of Warsaw. There's also a whole range of more popular books. This is only the pretty serious fiction and literary fiction and non-fiction. But there's a whole bunch of books that have been written in the sort of Chetan Bhagat, Shobha De mold. And then there's the relatively new phenomenon of quickie books about dramatic events. I have 9 books on my shelf about the 2008 terrorist attacks that took place at VT Station and at the Taj. And there's also a growing number of books about the city's underworld. To help us make sense of why Bombay is such an inspiration for writers, we have 2 excellent guests, one of whom is a translator and a literature professor, and the other has written 2 books set in Bombay and edited a third. Abhay Sardesai has many lives. Some of you may know him as the editor of Art India, which has been steering since November 2002. He's been visiting faculty in aesthetics at Mumbai University and the chair of humanities at KRVIA. He also teaches at the P.N. Doshi Women's College of Arts. For many years, he was an associate of the Pukar Research Collective, which was based here for some time, wasn't it, in this room, or in this office at any rate, and headed a fascinating project called Writing Across the City, which explored the connections between the city's many literatures and literary cultures. I'm insanely jealous of him because he just speaks so many languages, and he translates from Marathi, Konkani, and Gujarati. How do you manage that, man? Altaf Tayarwala has been leaving Bombay for as long as I've known him. Over the past few years, he's moved to, and stop me if I'm wrong, Lonavala, Pune, Boston, and Berlin. And though we've had many farewell dinners, after which I ceremonially delete his number from my cell phone, he always seems to return. His second book, Ministry of Hurt Sentiments, was published last month. It's a rage-filled poem that taps into the deep anxieties and indescribable joys of living in this city. His first novel, No God in Sight, is a compelling series of about 50 first-person narratives that wander across class and geographic lines in Bombay. It was translated into several languages, including German and a few others. Earlier this year, he edited a crime fiction anthology called Mumbai Noir. His short stories have been published in several Indian and international anthologies. He was awarded the DAAD Artist in Berlin Literature Grant for 2011. He is currently employed as an instructional designer in the e-learning industry, whatever that means, you have to explain it. And he spends his weekends driving around Bombay looking to buy a flat, an affordable flat. He is also not Abbas Tayarwala. The people often come up to him in parties and try to get roles in films and stuff like that.
Questions on his behalf.
But let's start with Abhay.
Hey, thanks, Naresh. You sort of took the poof out of my presentation because I was, in fact, going to talk about this magnificent installation which was mounted, I think, in Venice, 2003, by Michelangelo Pistoletto. And it was called, if I'm not mistaken, Love Difference, Artistic Movement for an Inter-Mediterranean Policy. And what it comprised was, you had these different types of mirrors stuck on polished wooden surfaces. And they all sort of came together in different sort of equations of composites to confirm a shape that resembled the shape of the Mediterranean basin. And in 2005, what it did was even more amazing. I think it was in Mantua, where he actually created these chairs out of different blocks of wood, and each of these chairs sort of resembled the different different lakes, rivers, and seas that flank the Mediterranean and that don't flank the Mediterranean. So you had the Black and the Baltic Sea, but you also had the Caribbean, amongst other things. So I was just wondering, sort of drawing from that particular instance, about what it would mean to actually come up with a map of literary cultures in the city. And I must admit that if one was to actually have a map which was composed out of a series of geographical striations with, as they do in most of our schools, most unimaginatively, with sort of areas shaded in different colors, full of sort of the Patelian instinct for reorganizing states, zones of community significance, I think it would do a great amount of injustice and also a great amount of disservice to the sheer diversity and the sheer sort of protean strength that most of our linguistic communities and literary communities in the city seem to have. Any kind of a mosaic of various isothermic patches that keep on changing would probably be able to do a greater amount of justice, I guess. And I'm sure most of the people around here would agree with me, because most of us speak different languages, have facilities in different registers, and we sort of keep on dipping in and out of different subcultural uses and abuses of language. A model of a kinetic map, I feel, with continuously mobile stretches seems like a more enabling and exciting paradigm. To say, for instance, that, say, Manto's Bombay is the stretch between Bombay Central and Muhammad Ali Road and Paidhuni is doing, I think, some kind of a disservice to acts of imagination and documentation that have also, I mean, in the case of somebody like Manto, explored the studios in Malad, or bungalow cultures in Malabar Hill. He's got this fantastic, and I'm just taking Manto as an example, fantastic story on Jinnah and his driver, if you remember. Or apartment lives on Cattle Road in Mahim. He has this fascinating character sketch of Noor Jahan and of Sitara Devi, both of whom used to live on that particular stretch. So, which sort of leads you to a larger question of translatability, really. And I'm sure this is something that you're going to touch on later on. How do areas that, how do areas actually lend themselves to be approached by writers belonging to distinct linguistic cultures? I think it's a very sort of key question that we need to ask ourselves every time we sit down and have a discussion about Bombay as a literary city, or Bombay as a font, as a figure and ground of the production of literature. Again, to cite one example, the chawl in Pula Deshpande, who's a Marathi writer, is both distinct and similar to the chawl in, say, Kiran Nagarkar. There's one entire book which is set in a chawl, as far as Pula is concerned, Patatachi Tsar. Many of you have probably read it. And you also have Nagarkar's Ravan and Eddi, and the second novel, which I haven't read really. Now, what are the differences? What are the similarities? Of course, there's a great amount of affinity in the way in which the particular sort of space is explored and the environment is checked out, as it were. But I feel the audience, that is produced, that is generated for a particular kind of narrative in Marathi on, in a book that actually addresses the experience of living in a chawl is decidedly different from the audience that's created for a similar experience in Nagarkar, who is, again, quite marvelously bilingual. He's not around, unfortunately. Of course, the pace of characterization is different. The different kinds of accents that are placed on events that come together or come apart to confirm the great Bombay chawl experience, all of them are quite different and similar. But at the same time, I feel that the level of intimacy which somebody like Pooler has is of a different quality than the level of intimacy that our friend Nagarkar has. And I think one of the reasons, of course, is that here is Pooler writing a book about chawls for a community of readers who probably have lived in them. Whereas Nagarkar is actually writing about chawls for people, for an audience which might not have lived in them. And I think this is a kind of a marker. I mean, you can't really go into an exegesis, you can't really go into a sort of detailed discussion about all the various markers or various mainstays that come together to confirm the great Bombay literary experience. But this is just an example to sort of talk about the various differences that exist in ways in which in which writers explore the experience of being in the city. What is quite fascinating really is the way in which different languages have sort of come together and have organized themselves, arranged themselves in different sort of sexy poses with each other. I mean, you can't really have, and I'm going to be very, very provocative really, because you can't really have fun unless and until you're provocative. So, a language like Konkani, for instance, okay, at one level, obviously had its great moment of coming into being in a city like Bombay. Shenoy Goebab, who's widely considered the progenitor of modern Konkani writing, actually had his first meeting, his first conference at what we now call the NGMA, the Kavas Jahangir Hall. And that really sort of started an entire sort of movement which, lots of Konkani speakers and, speakers sort of spanning different states, from Karnataka, Maharashtra and Goa, sort of coming together very self-consciously, becoming very sort of, instilling a sense of pride in the language, in being the sort of speaker of the language. So, on the one hand, you have a language like Konkani, which establishes itself in a place like Bombay, in much the same way, and lots of difference, of course, like a language like Sindhi. Lots of people who come after partition and set up schools or set up homes in places like Ulhasnagar and Chembur, actually start various organizations. And you have, in the course of my research, during the Writing Across the City project, you realize that there are lots of writers like Popati Hiranandani, for example, and a whole slew of other writers who have written quite marvelously about these experiences. So, and similarly with a language like Urdu, you actually have, in fact, I mean, when one talks about these languages, you just realize how stupendously Bombay, how stupendously indebted different literary cultures are to the city, as far as different points of growth of the language cultures are concerned. Again, to cite an example, modernism as a movement. Obviously, Gujarati and Marathi being the sort of, in-house languages of the city, you'd probably expect them to flourish in the environment of the city. But you also find that there are several other languages. A language like Urdu, for example. The progressive writers movement in the 30s actually sort of came together in different places in the city. So it's really quite fascinating. Also, I think what needs to be looked at with a great amount of acuity is the way in which different vectors, and these vectors include bhasha mandals, for example, or vyakhyan malas, for example, or libraries, for example, or Vachanmalas, for example. Okay, how all of them sort of actually facilitated the production of an audience for different kinds of languages, linguistic cultures, and literary cultures. So that I think is really, really very valuable and needs to be looked at by more scholars of urban cultures. The other point I just want to touch on, I think we don't really have too much of a time, but is the sort of co-evality or the co-temporality of, or the same timeness of different kinds of modernisms that seem to flourish in the city. I mean, look at, again, to take an example, an year like 1956, okay? You have Nissim Ezekiel's first book coming out. You have Basi Mardhekar getting the Sahitya Akademi Award. Basi Mardhekar, as you know, is probably the most important, the key figure as far as modernism in Marathi is concerned. And you also have Chitram Khanolkar, again, an extraordinarily important figure as far as a different brand of modernism in Marathi is concerned, sort of embarking on his writing projects. So it's quite fascinating, really, to actually mark out the different stages, the different stations of the growth of various literary cultures in the city by looking at them chronologically. And you find that there is a lot of shared space, a lot of sort of Venn diagram intersection sets. But at the same time, you also realize that there are lots of moments where there is absolutely no point of contact. You know, and this is something that came up, I think, in the discussion that we were all part of at the NGMA, where Jerry and Give and I were discussing the clearinghouse projects. You just realize that you had a whole sort of phalanx of first-rate poets, people like Mehrotra and people like Dilip Chitre and people like Kulatkar, and many of them bilingual, really. But you just realize that there doesn't seem to be, apart from these 3 or 4 people, there don't seem to be too many writers who sort of shaking hands across linguistic cultures. And there might be various sociological reasons for this, of course, which we might sort of explore in the course of this presentation. But what I really find very fascinating, and this I think is something that needs to be explored in various ways through art and through installations maybe, or through literary studies, is precisely this. I mean, the fact that at one point of time, in one given decade, you have so many writers who belong to different literary cultures, of course, and who are participating in genres which are quite similar. Okay, so you have writers who, writers in Gujarati, writers in Marathi, and writers in English who are looking at the sonnet, for instance, or who are trying to, sort of explore free verse at much the same time in different ways. And I think that sort of opens a window to understand the way in which the city has grown in the minds, in the collective imaginations, and in the individual imaginations of writers across the last 5 or 6 decades. In fact, what really comes to my mind is this fascinating play by Tom Stoppard called Travesties. I don't know whether anybody's seen it or read it. It's about this moment in Zurich in 1917 when you have Tristan Tzara, you have Vladimir Lenin, and you have James Joyce, occupying different areas of the same library, and they sort of interact, not knowing how phenomenally, sort of, and earth-shatteringly, sort of, marvelous their separate presences are as far as their particular chosen areas of intervention are. You know? So something similar seems to be happening here as well. You have Nissim, and you have Dom, and you have Mehrotra, and you have Basim Ardhekar and Khanolkar, and you have all the Gujarati poets, in fact, you know, who sort of people like Shitanshu Yashash Chandra, and you have people like Ravji Patel, who also seem to be sort of working on in their particular chosen areas, but who seem to be working, of course, knowing each other, but not really sort of swimming into each other's kens, you know, which is both perturbing and at the same time, you know, it's a fact. So I think that needs to be really looked at, and maybe, you know, as a possible area of study, it'll probably sort of lend itself to a more sort of to a definitely richer and deeper understanding of the way in which literary cultures actually evolve, you know, over time. I think that should be it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Abhay. Altaf, will you now read from some of your work? This is the world premiere of you reading, right? Since your book was published. Be honored, everybody.
Or be very afraid. This is from Ministry of Hurt Sentiments, which was just published last month by HarperCollins India. I've never read this before, so in case I'm going on for too long, let me know. Yeah, because I don't know how to time this out. War is an aquaguard salesman. He stands on the street across your building and looks up at your flat with the absorption of a grave digger, who's trying to estimate what size holes will be needed in the event that you and your kin consume rat poison to spare you the ignominy of impending eviction. When you committed to that 30-year home mortgage, you thought the future would honor the hopes you'd hoisted on it. The future turned out to be a soapy floor with no neon sign warning you to tread carefully. You were sliding along smoothly till you slipped and cracked your destiny's hip on the granite floor of the global market that prowls the planet like an addict, seeking the next cut-rate labor hit. The Africans are the new drug of choice. The Asians can have their backlit toys. By the time they notice, they'll have become the new Americans, hooked to newness, needing too many things of too little uses. Did anyone mention full circles? You swear you'll bash their face in. Let them send you to prison, Tihar if you're lucky, where they teach inmates Vipassana. When incarcerated poets and writers taste nirvana, their mouths pucker up like they've sucked on lemons. On day 11, when it's time to speak, jailed anarchists find they've swallowed their own tongues. Mimed declarations of revolution cut no ice. The carcass of hope putrefies in the eyes, from where it peers out like a rat trapped between the bathroom wall and a young woman wielding a stiletto. Fawzia has never done it, never taken life. This morning she thinks she just might. Cowering in a slimy corner under the commode is a furry little metaphor of Fawzia's own romantic self-pitying. Pleading, squealing, accommodating, compromising, scurrying, hiding, sniveling, exhausting, demeaning, splat. Spiked through its beady eyes with a wooden heel and scraped into the garbage bin is Fawzia's initiation into the grown-up world of rat-assassinating practical mindedness. From now on, there's no shying from the hard business of day-to-day living. First stop this morning, the local right-wing Shakha that has decreed that no female may be spotted on Valentine's Day hand in hand with a man who is neither brother nor husband. Fawzia wants to know the consequences beforehand. She can put up with the hair pulling and the ink throwing, the slapping and the clothes tearing. It's the attack on her lover that she wants to prevent. Why drag an innocent Aussie expat into local politics of hate? The Shaka chief suggests a simple solution. In exchange for a few thousand, he can offer Fawzia a love pass, which, when flashed, will signal to her would-be V-Day attackers that the woman and her lover have paid for their right to smooch and snuggle anywhere they like. Can I see it? Fauzi asks. The Shakha chief brings it out. The love pass is a 5-inch square hologram, state of the art and shiny. From the left, it's 2 crossed swords. From the right, it's Gandhi. When viewed directly, the love pass is a red cartoon heart nestled in the mouth of a tiger. We've got all wings covered, the Shaka chief points out. Hardline, radical, and center. Back on the streets, Fauzia thinks she knows what it's like to be a bird stuck in flight, flapping and flailing from ledge to roof, unable to find a spot to alight in the city that is all snarling surface and blinding lights. And the empty stomach rumble from 24/7 construction sites, where tentacular cranes wind non-stop atop upcoming skeletons of cloud-piercing landmarks. A city retreating into the skies. Its denizens gaze down from balconies like bored gods. They can barely believe their eyes. When surveyed from floors 25 and up, Mumbai looks just like Shanghai. Now the only way to sustain the delusion is always to remain this high. When the yearning strikes to walk the earth, rush to the rooftop helipad, from where the chopper taxi will airlift you over slums and traffic jams and open sewers, to a gated fairyland deep in the hilltop woods. Welcome to the aesthete's refuge. Its cobbled alleys and wooden chateaus constructed by a savvy corporation that empathizes with your appetite for all things foreign. An ahistorical Europe copy-pasted for your tropical convenience. War-free champagne to go with non-communist chicken. The peroxide blonde waitress's English is flecked with Russian. She has been imported from Minsk along with the vodka and sausages. A potential mail-order bride dressed in black apron, here to fulfill your fantasy of being served by Caucasian women. A blowjob, you say to Nina, the waitress in Hindi, when she asks if there's anything else you'd like. Mera choose? Nina says, what's that? Your friends snigger at the waitress's uncomprehending smile. Never mind, you switch to English. Get me check. Randi, you hiss at Nina's East European back. Rand, ho, slut. The whole world's a Randian whore in your summary of it. The whole world's salivating for a slice of your market. Your untapped appetites are the world's meal ticket. Let's hope your unaccustomed hearts can deal with it as corporations wheel in their buffet of coarse delights. The sugars and meats and first world lethargy. The artificial chemical construct of modern day plenty. It's a good thing you believe in karma and destiny. It'll keep you from connecting the dots when at 30 you have to start shooting insulin like a junkie. Blame your lung cancer on some past life transgression or on your inheritance of impoverished genes that prevent you from sampling the earth's delights with your newfound financial means. Your bloody pauper genes and the weak organs they drive. Too much steak and you break into hives. A teenage bout of jaundice has left your liver unable to abide so much as a sliver of the cool single malt vibe that you would have liked to put out as you prowl around the lounge, trying to pick up one-night stands who are still learning to shed their Bollywood-bred notions of ever-after romance.
So Altaf, I'm going to start with you. Why do you keep coming back to Bombay, even as you keep trying to leave it? Do you have a love pass here or something?
Yeah, I think it's a case of unfulfilled desire. I've been wanting a house in the city ever since I turned an adult, and the city will not grant me a house, so I keep coming back like a spurned lover, and then I get disgusted. No house inside, yeah. House for Mia Altaf.
You've been to some quite distant places in search of this house, haven't you?
Yes. I've been all the way from Panvel east right up to, I think, Vasai.
Godbandha Road, you were telling me.
Yeah, that is Thane, Godbandha Road, Vasai, all over, yes. And I'm actually I've become addicted to the apartment hunt now. So I hope I never find the apartment because it's so much fun. You know, it's just every week is a renewed sense of hope that maybe this weekend I will find the utopia, and then utopia doesn't exist, and you heal over the week, and then you forget by the weekends.
And it's also utopia for 80 lakhs or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yes, non-negotiable.
So how much, when you go home in the evening, are you keeping notes? How does this feed into what you're writing?
Well, I haven't written since I started working in January, but this last book was written over the past 2-3 years. It was not a book which was supposed to have come out ever because I was working on it on the side. It was a book I didn't like writing. I was always trying to write the novel which my agent would like and which would bring me some money. But none of those novels took off eventually, and I have like 6 unfinished novels on my laptop. And I think it was last year when I kind of paid attention to this ignored child of mine, you know, that, and it became the kind of receptacle of all my failures and of all my failed narrative attempts. And it just became this kind of tumble of images and mini stories, and it also somehow ended up mirroring the incoherence of this city. Because I think now Mumbai has become a very incoherent city, and attempts to make sense of it get more and more difficult.
When you started talking to me about this novel years ago, you told me that you saw Ronald McDonald rise from his bench and stalk through this new globalized city at night. And these were images that had also come to you from the World Social Forum in 2004.
And also images of people burning the McDonald's mascot in anti-globalization morchas around the world. Indonesia, Philippines, I mean, for some reason, Ronald McDonald turns out to be this kind of target of hatred and the symbol of globalization. So I think it was sometime in 2008 or 6 or 7 when I thought, what if Ronald McDonald came alive? It was this very same Ronald McDonald at the VT McDonald's. And he came alive, and what would happen, you know, how he would be kind of rogered by the anti-globalization tribe in Bombay.
So he gets a sort of single line or a couple of lines in this book now.
All
But it is
my
still
novels
very
are
much a book about sort of this new Bombay, this new neoliberal Bombay.
It's a book about the ruthlessness and the kind of this kind of unrelenting attempt to maximize one's investment at any cost, you know, and because now everyone thinks of their house as an investment, and I'm trying to find that one person who will look at their lives or their homes or the kind of city not as an investment, not as a source of something, but as something where you are just allowed to live in peace. But that's getting more and more difficult no matter where you go.
One reflection we have of sort of how the city is changing was until fairly recently, Bombay was home to many bilingual writers, especially in Marathi, but also in Gujarati, people like Arun Kholatkar and Nagarkar and Shanta Gokhale. Dilip Chitre. And they had imaginative lives in 2 languages. I can't think of very many writers our age who can do that. Why has there been a decline in bilingualism?
You know, I don't really agree that there has been a decline in bilingualism. I just feel that the avenues probably for publishing in Marathi have not really kept up with the avenues for publishing in English. And so there's an obvious choice. And again, you know, the best example is somebody like Vilas Sarang, who after having written for the longest period of time in Marathi, or somebody like Kiran, in fact, Nagarkar, who after having written his first, and I think the first Sat Sakam Trichalis in Marathi, sort of chose to actually write in English. And I think that was one moment I remember which sort of led to a great brouhaha as far as in the Marathi literary culture circles were concerned, because it was obviously also the time when you know, it was a very sort of Girish Karnadian broken images kind of moment where everybody thought that one language is being chosen over another language only because there is a possibility of future advances. And also because, as it happens in Girish Karnad's play, there is a possibility of getting an award like the Booker, for instance. You know, so obviously these are some of the reasons why probably the act of writing in two languages simultaneously has really taken some kind of a beating. But I do believe that there are lots and lots of people from our generation really who have a facility in several languages. It's only that probably there are not too many opportunities. What really alarms me, in fact, is more than the sort of choice of being a bilingual writer or a poet, is what really alarms me is the fact that there is not really a culture of translations in the city. In spite of being home to so many languages and to, all of us really, speak at least 2 or 3 languages with at least some kind of a facility. And I feel that that's something that's really quite disheartening, and on the one hand you have a forum like the Sahitya Akademi, which publishes this totally unimaginative translations, and on the other you have publishers in English who don't really care too much for translations of especially genres like poetry, So I think somewhere in between lies the story.
We've spoken before of how writers like Pula Deshpande, for instance, still remain untranslated. What are the challenges of translating somebody as specific as Pula?
I think the first and the most important thing is the crisis that every translator experiences when he or she strives to import the environment, of a particular novel or a particular poem in a language that in some measure is alien to the experience which the source text encapsulates and presents. So at one level, I think that is probably the difficulty, though I don't really think, especially given the fact that the experiences seem to be similar, that should not really be the case. But I really feel that it's more to do with the infrastructure, and the fact that many of the language departments in our colleges are dying out. Look at Gujarati, for example. Once an extraordinarily thriving department at Elphinstone College, at Xavier's College, no longer there. Just 1 or 2 students at the Department of Gujarati at the University of Bombay. Can you believe that? In a city where you have, industrialists like the Ambanis and, you name them, who speak Gujarati at home. It's unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable, and completely criminal, if you ask me. And on the other hand, you have people like Raj Thackeray and others who, sort of whip up a kind of a frenzy and are supposed or ostensibly sort of pretend that they're sort of protecting a language, but they're doing a great amount of disservice because, what are they finally doing apart from actually creating a sort of anti-subculture or promoting a weird kind of, enmity between linguistic groups? I really feel that if the government or if parties like the MNS actually are really keen on protecting the language, they should come up with different sort of language laboratory projects, different translatorial exercises, and I think, to actually keep on insisting that you should actually, I remember this fascinating sticker that made the rounds, even in the departments of Marathi at the University of Bombay, where it said that Shivya Dya Pan Marathit, which means that if you want to actually spout out invectives, make a choice, do it in Marathi. So I think at one level the rhetoric seems to have completely overwhelmed the actuality, and that I think is the real tragedy.
Just also make a point. I'm also not very certain how you can clearly demarcate between a bilingual writer versus an English writer, especially about Bombay writers. Because as Abhay said, we all speak several languages. And I think anyone attempting to write an authentic Bombay novel will have various voices ringing in one's head. And ideally, I would like to read a Bombay novel which is written in Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, Urdu, English. But until that happens, I'm quite all right with the writer playing the role of the translator for me. So when I read a book in English from a Bombay writer, I suspect, I think I know what the mechanics behind that is, that writer has played the role of a translator already for me. So that boundary blurs in such circumstances.
Rushdie once famously said that Bombay's native language is Agmi, Hindi, Urdu, Gujarati, Marathi, and English.
But you know, I must sort of interject. I must tell you about this very interesting experiment that I once conducted right here. In fact, when I was part of Pukar, I sort of conducted this translation workshop. And what we did was, there's this fascinating text by Madgaonkar, which was written in the 1860s. It's called Mumbai Se Varnan. And it's probably the earliest sort of history of the city. Naresh will correct me if I'm wrong. And it's probably one of the better histories, much better than Gillian Tyndall, definitely. What we did was, we sort of took one or two chapters of that particular text, and I tried to play to the strengths of the participants, and many of them were, their source languages were Tamil or Konkani and Marathi and Hindi, and one of them spoke Bhojpuri. What we tried to do was, we actually sort of divided a particular snatch, a particular chapter from that particular book into different segments. And I got them to translate segment by segment, okay, in these different 5 or 6 languages. And then we sort of tried to see if we could assemble a kind of an oral installation, which would then sort of, in some measure coincide with the great Bombay spoken experience. Like, I'm speaking to you in English, in a certain kind of English. I might choose to speak to my students in a different kind of English. At home, I might speak to my daughter in Konkani or Marathi, and with my colleagues in Hindi. So, you know what I mean? So it's a different sort of, crest and trough structure, which I tried to replicate in this workshop. And I think it failed, of course, but I think it failed marvelously. And it sort of allowed me a window into checking out different ways in which we can actually make sense multilingually of the experience of being in the city.
Well, actually, you've set us up nicely for what I was going to move to, but Govind, it's actually been translated, Mumbai Chi Varnan, by a wonderful fellow called Munli Ranganathan, who again sort of represents the great Bombay spirit, because he speaks about 8 languages and reads 8 different languages. So he was perfectly set to do that. But as you pointed out, this was a history of our city. And until recently, sort of the classic Bombay writing has always been the novel. Rushdie, Nagarkar, Rohington Mystery, among others. But over the past few years, it's really the non-fiction about Bombay that sort of gained the maximum attention. It started with Maximum Mehta, and since then there's been Catherine Boo's Behind the Beautiful Forevers and Sonia Falero's Beautiful Thing. I'm going to put this to both of you, but starting with you, Tayarwala. Is fiction failing the city? The contemporary city?
Well, fiction writers can't afford to be here anymore.
That's such a Naresh question.
Well, when fiction writers can afford to live in the city, sure, they write about it. Otherwise, visiting non-fiction writers from abroad can happily pontificate about the city and fly back. That's what's happening usually. I think it feeds. I don't know if fiction is failing the city or if fiction has failed, because I read Arvind Adiga's The Last Man in Tower last year, and it's gone and perched itself inside. It won't come out. It's an unforgettable book. I don't know which non-fiction book could compete with such a concentrated look at the dynamics of redevelopment and the tearing down of a whole fabric of a building. But I really haven't been a fan of much of the new fiction books or non-fiction books which have come out. I tried to read Catherine Boo's book, and I found it a little pointless after a while. I mean, this is relentless harping about the same kind of desperation of the characters. A book which I really enjoyed when I was writing my first book was Pinky Virani's Once Was Bombay. I think that did something. It captured the flux between the Bombay to Mumbai thing. But no, as a fiction writer, I have to strongly protest that fiction is not failing the city.
So they say?
I think I don't really, not half as optimistic as Altaf is. I really do feel that in the past 7 or 8 years, non-fiction has really taken over in more ways than one. What at one point of time in the 80s, you had this sort of quite a few fiction works of fiction that sort of tried to encapsulate, address the experience of living in the city in different capacities, is now being sort of again, it's an act of translation. I feel it's sort of is now being sort of made sense of by non-fiction writers like you, Naresh. Your marvelous book on the jazz culture in Bombay and other places, I think is really quite a contribution. And you have people, you also forgot to mention Gyan Prakash, whose book I think is really very well written. And that I think is something that I see happening, that a lot of non-fiction is being written with a great amount of sensitivity. So like at one point of time, you read a book like Gillian Tyndall and were appalled by the terrible standards of writing. It was really like being in a classroom. And now when you read Gyan Prakash, or when you read your book, or when you read even Catherine Boo, whether you agree with her or not, you just find that there is a greater sort of alacrity with the language. There is also a terrific sort of sense of what actually makes the city tick, and also what actually allows the writer, with his or her access to resources of language and the imagination, to bring that city which is ticking alive.
All right, I'm buying you a drink tonight. Let's open this up to the audience now. Put your hand up, please, if you have a question, and we'll point to you. Yeah.
One book that wasn't mentioned is Shantaram. Is that because it hasn't made a deep enough impression, or has it been talked about enough? And another comment has to do with the discussion about translation. It seems to me that English is starting to dominate all other languages, not just Indian, simply because of the number of words flowing into it, the number of different expressions flowing into it. Other languages have great difficulty keeping up with. Indian languages, there's perhaps, if they're lucky, maybe a tenth of the words in common use as there are in English. The number of colors is a useful indication. The number of colors in a language that the language can describe is a useful indication as a metric of how well developed the language is. And in most Indian languages, going beyond 6 or 7 different colors is a stretch, at least in everyday use.
I don't think, I'm not to disagree with you, but I don't think English meets all my needs either. I don't think English meets all my needs either. There are so many things which cannot be described in English, which cannot be captured. And I know this because I know 3-4 other languages. And I know the kind of experiences which English leaves out. But this is a question which is often asked abroad. That why do you write in English? Why not some Hindi? Because when you go, for instance, travel in Europe, it's a very and very linguistically kind of dominant. Every region will have its language, and they're extremely protective about that language and sustaining the literature in that language and the use of that language. I don't know. Earlier, I used to feel quite guilty about having written in the language of so-called privilege in India. But now I don't think the English speaker is necessarily, at least in Bombay, in any kind of position of privilege. Yes, we may have access to a larger publishing industry, I think, but I think the regional press is much more profuse and has a wider readership. But it's also, I think, we've until now seen writers who've been wanting to somehow be accepted by the West. I can't speak for you. Honestly, I never thought No God in Sight would ever be read by anyone other than a very small Bombay audience. People like Naresh or Eunice D'Souza or someone, and it would be accepted there. And so for me, English has never become an international language in my head at least. I don't know, I'm completely going off on a tangent here, but yeah.
I sort of am tempted to agree with Altaf. I don't really think that, I mean, yes, of course, English has, and the culture surrounding the English publishing industry does have a greater sense of purchase, money-wise and reach-wise. But I think all in all, you have lots of young writers, especially in genres like poetry, for instance. I feel that at the moment, poetry in Marathi is really thriving as a genre, as compared to poetry in English, which is pretty, a lot of it is pretty bad. Though there are more occasions, and there seem to be increasing occasions for lots of people to keep on celebrating poetry in English. But you find that a movement like the Abhidananda movement, which Bimal today has begun, he has a press, he has a magazine, and actually sort of encourages lots of translations as well. Lends itself to lots of participation from different quarters. So, I mean, I know the angle of, I can completely appreciate the angle of your argument, but I'm not completely in agreement.
Just as an example, on this poster, one might say it's a sharply curving spiral staircase. How would one say that? I don't know how to say that in Hindi. I've been speaking Hindi all my life.
Sure, but then how would you say कि मेरा तो full to पोपट हो गया यार? How do you say that in English? So the point is that there are different, as Altaf said, that there are different ways and different registers, okay, which actually allow you to express certain states of being, certain experiential possibilities, and I think it would be really quite sort of ungentlemanly really to sort of have this, to pretend to be witnesses to some kind of a weird gladiatorial contest between languages. At least.
Anybody else? Question?
Sir, why don't we have vernacular languages in holidays like Diwali, and English is spoken in 12 countries of the world, and the Nobel Prize is won by all the non-English people. It's not won by the English people who are speaking English. So if we have to be a developed nation, we have to promote our vernacular languages. By simply saying that Gujarati department is not there, why not create in the holidays, Saturday, Sunday, or Thursday or Sunday, and have centers, cells, groups, and let the teachers come there? Because what will happen to the vernacular language teachers in the municipal schools? Why not have governing councils there and let private people run that sense of giving it to private people to run and no government control? Have satellite TV, have information kiosk, have ICT over there, and have change the English words to vernacular languages. We don't have translatory people over there. Thank you.
Yes, again, I sort of don't completely agree with what you're saying. Mainly because look at what has actually happened as far as this exercise that we embarked on from 1947 onwards, where we went into this sort of frenzy of stupid and completely unimaginative translations of words that have gained currency, the words from English, okay, and you come up with like completely laughable instances. I mean, you don't really want to say कि मी अग्नि रथाची प्रतीक्षा करतोय, which means I'm waiting for the train. I mean, this is what, for example, Savarkar came up with, or me dhumra nalika pitoy, I'm smoking a cigarette. I mean, you don't really want to come with all these kinds of, sort of counter expressions. And if you actually look at Doordarshan, if you look at a lot of television, before the cable channels took over, you find that this penchant for Sanskritization actually completely defeated, the idea of getting more and more people to participate. I think what really saved us was Bollywood at one point of time.
Though actually some of those neologisms really work well, like Doordarshan, which encapsulates the concept so well. Rajiv.
Yeah, I just wanted to compliment the panel and Naresh on this discussion tonight, because I think out of almost all the Multipolis Mumbais, even the ones on environment and architecture, somehow literature almost has told us more about the city than all the other kind of topics and subjects we've addressed in this series. Maybe it's a question, I'll try to phrase it as a question, but it's also a comment and maybe an elaboration on what's been spoken about tonight. So in any case, so this idea that, for me, that many disciplines and kind of practices are somehow addressing this need for this practical response from a society. And it's happening. If you see anything in the last 2 to 3, 4 years, Bombay has become less about maybe isolated, nodes of thought, but things have become somehow much more entwined, networked, complicated. Issues that were once politics have now become literature, have become architecture. It's a very interesting way of looking at how the city is evolving. So my question would be, if we study the past, and again, a comment about the idea that there are no departments anymore, or departments are dwindling in the studies of very specific, historically pertinent, either literary styles or languages. What do you guys predict for the next 20 years? Do you guys predict maybe that we are going to become more isolated in terms of, for example, language, or we are going to become more global in terms of language, or are we going to become more universal with languages start to die out? I mean, I'm kind of, again, provoking some type of, look into the future, because I think literature is one of those things where the city is told through literature. And somehow those things are very, they're amorous and contentious in a way.
I'm unable to answer such questions. It's a very good question, but I'm just a practitioner of the craft, so I can't pontificate.
But it's really very difficult to predict, what's going to happen in the future, and sort of to come up with some kind of a prognosis about how, what kind of tricks history is going to play on you and how you're going to respond to all of them. But what I really feel would be very exciting would be a culture of graphic novels, maybe. Not only in English, but also in all the vernaculars, all the non-English languages, that all of us use. That would be really enabling, I feel, because if you have a series of graphic novels in Marathi or Hindi, most importantly in the Bombaya that all of us speak, I think it's a limitless arena, and there's a fantastic possibility that would lead to various acts of imagination, which would be yes, there's this genre called graphic novel, which is now catching on, and it's sort of a lot of people from young people are actually quite excited about it, and we've written about it.
You've got pictorial, you've got Bombay. It sounds like the Bollywoodization of literature almost.
Which is not a bad thing, really.
Which is not a bad thing
at all. I mean, what do you mean by Bollywoodization of
I didn't mean it in a good way. Yes.
Yeah.
The Chetan Bhagatization.
No. Terrible. That's terrible.
I heard he is working on a graphic novel right now. So.
Yeah. As the owner of one of Bombay's best bookstores, now sadly defunct.
Yes, there are quite a few net blogs in Marathi, definitely yes. Especially amongst journalists. And what's really quite fascinating is that many of them refer constantly to articles in English. Whereas that doesn't seem to be happening as far as the English bloggers are concerned. I mean, almost sort of compulsorily, none of the bloggers that I check out regularly sort of refer to any of the language press blog entries. I mean, unless and until it's about something as specific as the MNS or some editorial in Samna, for instance, which they want to critique. So that doesn't seem to be happening.
No, but if you look at almost everybody you know or meet is doing something on the net to write express word. And it almost doesn't matter whether it's a blog or a book or whatever. Is that same gusto being unleashed in Marathi and Gujarati?
I don't really think so, but honestly, I'm not really the right person to answer this because I've not really sort of looked at it in any sort of.
Because a part of the conversation, fabulous conversation, has been almost a sort of value judgment on, too much English, And if that's where people want to be, then are you just fighting a thing because it's the right thing to do?
I think I think this is as sort of as part of my response to the gentleman who was positing all those possibilities from the corner. I sort of talked about how, and Altaf also referred to it, and so did Naresh, the fact that several parts of ourselves respond to different acts of language, different acts of different languages. So I think it's not really being facetious at all, or not really being pragmatic at all. When you say that we need to sort of also participate in different language cultures that are non-English. And though, of course, yes, English is really overtaking, and as language chauvinists would say, that it's really eating at the vitals of all the other languages, which I don't really totally disagree. But the fact remains that you can't really only do with English, make do with English. I, for example, have to sort of take recourse to Konkani, which is the language that I grew up with at my home, to Hindi with my colleagues, and to Marathi as a language that I read in and I sort of constantly talk in. And of course, Bollywood is all around us. So, so I don't really think that one is being disingenuous at all when one is saying that one needs to protect or one needs to participate. The point is, I think we need to be more sensitive to the fact that it's not only English that makes us what we are. And I think that somehow in various quarters seems to be lacking.
Over the past few months, this great cloud of despondency seems to have settled over Bombay. Both India Today and Outlook have done cover stories on the decline of Bombay. One of my favorite descriptions of Bombay comes from Charles Correo, who said, Bombay is a great city and a terrible place. And I think, sort of this is the paradox that gives that creative tension that will keep inspiring writers. So I think we'll end on this note. Thank you so much, Abhay. Thanks, Altaf. And come back next month. Next Wednesday, we'll talk about Bombay and innovation.